Suomi, the land of the Finns, a land bordered by Russia to the east, Estonia to the south, Sweden to the west and Norway to the north. Focused on the capital of Helsinki in the south, the lands of the Finns are not solely inhabited by them. The far northern regions are home to the Sami, the southwestern coasts are the Swedish-speaking Finns, the southwestern regions near St. Petersburg are home to Russian speakers. Other notable groups are the Finnish Tartars, Tavastins, Karelians, Estonians, Livonians and global immigrants. But what's the story? Looking at the Finnic language, it's clear that it is different from the Slavic languages to the east and the North Germanic to the west. This is because they belong to the Uralic family. This includes the Finnish branch, home to the Finnish language, Karelian, of the Karelian region of Russia, Estonian and Southern Estonian of Estonia, Livonian, of Latvia, and Germanic, a nearly dead language spoken in the Baltic coastal region of Russia, Ludic of southwestern Karelia, Mikhail on the Swedish side of the Finno-Swedish border, the Kven of the far north of Norway and the Veps of the Veps national Volas in Russia. Veps is notable as it's the most traditional of the Finnic languages, still using much of the archaic systems. The Uralic family also includes the Hungarian language, but they are part of separate branches of the tree, having some similarities but very different vocabularies. But where did the Finns come from? Note, I'll be referring to nations or kingdoms that may not exist in the time period. I do this for ease of understanding. Now from what historians can tell, the first people who inhabited the lands arrived 11,000 years ago when the last glacial period ended in roughly 9000 BCE. It's important to know that the exact times are still subject to research and these are the closest approximations based on carbon dating and archaeological excavations. In Finland, various Stone Age groups lived in the land, but their true names are lost. Of the groups we know of, they are named after the location of discovery or major artifacts. The Kukkinen, named after the municipality of the same name. The Kunda, named after the Estonian town they were discovered. The Pulja, named after the Pulja village. Easiest way to know where a group was found would be to look up the name. Others had more item-based names, such as the ceramic home culture, a transitional group that existed between the nomadic hunter-gatherers and settled agrarian people. Their ceramics are important as, aside from being asbestos wares to temper the clay, the pottery predated the sickle. That is to say that, compared to Europeans who became farmers, then made ceramics. These peoples created pottery, before farming, which was more like to Asians. There was also the cord and ware culture which dominated much of the Nordic countries, Northern Europe and much of the Great European plains. The pottery is called so because of the rope-like pattern of the ceramics. This was until around 3200 BCE with the European Bronze Age. This mostly saw bronze artifacts in the Mediterranean area and parts of Central Europe. Its salt trade with the Nordic world and scattered bronze items would appear in the records. It wasn't until 1500 BCE, roughly 18 centuries later, that the Nordic Bronze Age began. The Nordic Bronze Age mainly focused on the Danish, Swedish and Norwegian areas. This does not solely refer to the Danes, Swedes or Norwegian people, but for ease of understanding of the location. As these regions primarily focused on the development of the resources, those of the Finnish lands had access to these metals through the Baltic Sea trade. This is because much of the coastlines of the counties bordering the north side of the Baltic were mountainous or unsuitable for traditional farming. That meant they had to trade or raid for their resources. Given the relative calm of the Baltic, much of the northern Baltic nations became adept sailors and shipwrights. But not to get ahead of myself. The Bronze Age ended in early 500 BCE and naturally led into the Iron Age. This also saw the origin of the Finnish proper, or the Varsina Suomalaiset. Finnish is not my mother tongue, so bear with me. As well as the Finnish proper were the Tavastins, or the Himalaya, and the Karelian, or the Karela. The next 12 centuries are sparsely recorded as much of the groups would be mostly nomadic or small villages, so let's move to the Viking Age. When people talk about Viking era, most focus on those from the homeland of the Dane, Norge, and Swedes. Yet there are two other major groups sailing and raiding: the Estonian and Finns. Most of focus on the Vikings was on their activities involving the Frankish kingdom and the lands of Britannia. Yet they were just as active in East Europe and the Black Sea area. This was thanks in part to the special design of the ships, which allowed for movement through rivers to open waters, which worked in turn with the stern and bow being identical, allowing for forward or backwards movement. The Eastern Romans referred to these river-faring traders/raiders as the Varangian. Most of the Varangian were ethnically Swedish, but most seafarers of the Baltic were included in this group as they were found in the eastern part of European riverways. The Varangian were best known by the East for being a part of the Byzantine Varangian Guard, raiders that were hired by the Roman Emperor to defend the region. A group of the Varangians, known as Arus, would also settle in the lands by the river. Their leader Rurik of Vladika would settle in Novgorod in 862 CE, followed by his relative Oleg of Novgorod conquering Kiev. The lands would later be a part of the Kievan Rus state. The Scandinavian Rus would eventually be Christianized and incorporated by the Eastern Slavics by the late 11th century. Christianization of the Nordic and Baltic states went slower compared to the lands close to the papacy. To put it simply, the further a nation was from the Vatican, the more effort it took the rulers to Christianize the people. Harald Bluetooth of the Danes was the first to profess his Christianity in 975 CE. The Dalby Church of Scania, the oldest church in Scandinavia, was built in 1040 CE. This led into the Northern Crusades, sometimes referred to as the Baltic Crusades or the Swedish Crusades. Taking place in the 1100s, it was largely spearheaded by the Kingdom of Sweden and the Teutonic Order. The Teutonics focused on the conquest and quote-unquote conversion of the Old Prussians and Baltic people, Old Prussian being the name for the pre-Germanic people who inhabited the lands. The Kingdom of Sweden focused on the conquest of Finland, converting the pagans to the Catholic faith. The first Swedish crusade was led by Erik IX Edvardsson and the English Archbishop Uppsala, Henry. Not to be confused with the Cardinal, King Henry of the Spanish Avis family with English ancestors, or Bishop Henry of Blois, brother to the King Stephen Henry. The English seem to have a thing with the religious leaders related to the leader of the country being named Henry. Anyway, Erik IX and Bishop Henry were said to be going to Finland to put a stop to the raiding by the pagans. Raiding, by raiders? It's more likely than you think. A small issue with this is that it might have never happened. Much of the information was written 2-ish centuries after, so the information on the First Swedish Crusade is considered to be legend. The crusade saw Bishop Henry killed by a Finnish peasant named Lally on the 20th of January, 1156 on the frozen lake of Koilijärvi. This crusade saw Erik IX and Henry canonized as saints, with Henry becoming a martyr of the Catholic faith. The Second Swedish Crusade is more likely to have existed and should just be called the First Swedish Crusade. This crusade saw Birger Jarl of the House of Jobo, Jarl of Sweden, under the command of Erik XI. This crusade saw the Swedish forces fighting and subjugating the Tavastans. The Third Swedish Crusade saw the subjugation of the Karelian. Around the end of the 1300s, prior to 1397, the Swedish crown ruled all the northernmost lands of Sweden and Finland, the northern lands being inhabited by the Sami tribes. I say before 1397 as after that point, Erik of Pomerania became the first king of the Kalmar Union, focused around the city of Kalmar. This saw Erik become Erik III of Norway, Erik VII of Denmark, and Erik XIII of Sweden. But I'll just say Erik of Kalmar. He was deposed in favor of his nephew Christopher of Bavaria, The Kalmar Union lasted until 1523 when Gustav Vasa led a Swedish revolt because they were tired of the Union being shorthand for Danish rule. The end of the Kalmar Union saw them separating into the Danish-Norwegian Union and the Kingdom of Sweden. In the split, Sweden took Finland and continued as they were. Oddly enough, the Protestant Reformation was crucial to the birth of a Finnish identity. This is because, while much of southern Europe was Catholic, northern Europe began to shift to the Protestant ideals. With the translation of the Bible into German, Gustav Vasa saw a way to profit. Catholic churches are tax-exempt and as such, represent a significant amount of money the king couldn't access. So the Swedish declared that they were Protestant and dissolved many of the Catholic churches. Now, they just needed someone to translate the Bible from Latin into the common tongue. Issue though, the eastern lands of the Swedish kingdom, Finland, a majority didn't speak Swedish or would be inclined to learn. Thankfully, someone existed that understood Latin, Sweden, and the solely spoken Finnish. A Finnish Lutheran clergyman, Mikhail Agricola, was tasked to basically figure out the Finnish language. He traveled through the Finland and recorded, phonetically, how the Finnish language was spoken. He simplified and streamlined much of the language. Because of this, Mikhail Agricola is called the father of the Finnish language. Given he literally wrote the book on it, I'd have to agree. Jumping ahead to the 1700s, we have the Great Northern War. This saw the boy King Carolus Rex lead his army against the Russian, Danish, Norwegian and Polish-Lithuanian armies. Carolus Rex, or Charles XII, won many victories, and received many peace offers, which he rejected. The Northern War ended with the Swedish king. A bullet fell the king during the siege of Fredriksson, Norway at the age of 36. His defeat and death saw the sale of the Baltic territories to the Tsardom of Russia. The city of St. Petersburg was founded in the captured Swedish territory that would have been a part of the Finnish region. Gustav III of Sweden tried to reclaim the lost territories in the Russo-Swedish War from 1788 to 1790. The result was status quo ante bellum. That meant as it was before the war. The Finnish War occurred in 1808 to 1809 under Gustav IV Adolf and the loss of Finland. This saw a new Swedish constitution and he was deposed in favor of his nephew Charles XIII. Gustav IV was an enemy of Napoleon. War was declared by Denmark, Norway and Russia. This led to the Finnish War. It ended in defeat and Swedish neutrality. An issue was that Charles XIII had no heir apparent. Charles August of Augustenburg was chosen but died before Charles XIII. The situation was getting worse as Charles XIII's health was deteriorating rapidly. Soon, Jean-Baptiste Jules Bernadotte, a general of Napoleon's, was chosen and became the crown prince in 1810, upon his arrival to Sweden. By 1812, Charles XIII had become virtually mute with his fading memories, leaving Jean-Baptiste, or Charles XIV John, as the de facto king. In 1814, following a series of Napoleon's defeats, Sweden declared war on Napoleon's Danish ally, claiming Norway. It was obvious that Napoleon could not win against the combined power of England, Russia, Prussia and the Sixth Coalition, so Sweden decided to claim what they could. Finland was taken by Russia, there was no way they could take it back, but Denmark had Norway and they could take it. 4th of November, 1814 saw the birth of the Swedish-Norwegian Union. On the 5th of February, 1818 the House of Bernadotte took power as Charles XIII died without a natural heir. Charles XIV John was both King of Sweden and Norway. He's listed in Norwegian as Karl III Johan. Meanwhile, Finland was declared a Grand Duchy in Russia, giving them exclusive privileges such as their own rulers. Though the Grand Duke just so happened to be the Tsar of Russia. They also had a diet, or a legislative assembly that decided matters of the state. Though this was only done when the Grand Duke called it. It wouldn't be until the end of the Crimean War that the Diet would be called by Alexander II. He promised to implement changes to the constitution and have the Diet meet more often. Officially they were to meet at least every 5 years, but really met every 3. Yet in 1881, Alexander II was assassinated and his son Alexander III took the throne. Issues arose. He was a counter-reformer and undid much of the changes his father made. Yet Russia didn't fight any wars, so Alexander III is styled as a peacemaker. He also helped to forge the Russo-French alliance. Much of the independence Finland had experienced was withdrawn and incorporated into the empire as a whole. Tsar Nicholas II passed the February Manifesto in 1899, which stripped the Diet of its powers, limiting it to an advisory position. The early 1900s saw the Russification of the empire, or the assimilation of groups into the Russian identity. During the Russo-Japanese War of 1905 saw major strikes in Finland, demanding better rights and universal suffrage. Added acts on the right to monitor members of the government. Granted freedom of speech, freedom of assembly and association, and freedom of the press. These reforms established the hallmarks of today's Parliament of Finland. The first Finnish election was held on the 16th of April 1907. This followed the first of 4 Russian state dumas between 1906 to 1917. They were to assist the Tsar in the governing of the empire but really didn't do anything. World War I eventually happened and the Russian Empire was not prepared to field an army of its size. Logistic issues plagued the empire and eventually saw the rise of the Petrograd Soviets. Petrograd to St. Petersburg was changed to a less German-sounding name. Dumb I know, but still. It was founded by the Russo-Ukrainian, Lev Davidovich Bronstein, aka Leon Trotsky. With the help of Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, or Lenin, they led a mob to the Tsar's palace and, despite the propaganda by the Soviets, did not fight the palace guards. The guards let them in without a fight. This led to the Russian Civil War, which saw the small radical Bolsheviks, mean majority, and the liberal Mensheviks, or majority, fight against the Royalists. Commonly referred to as the Reds and the Whites. It saw many breakaway groups such as an independent Poland, Baltic states, Finland, Ukraine, the Caucasus, many Central Asian states, and most notably, the anti-communist Roman von Ungern Sternberg, who fled to Mongolia and tried to start his own Khanate, aiming to restore the monarchy to Russia. After the end of the Russian Civil War, many of the breakaway republics were reincorporated into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Finland retained its independence. For the first time in centuries, Finns governed Finland without another nation trying to govern them. Less than a year after they gained their independence, 6th of December, 1917, the government created the first Air Force as an independent entity on the 6th of March 1918, predating the British RAF by 1 month. This isn't saying that they had the first pilots, just that their Air Force existed independently from the rest of the military first. For the Finnish Defence Force and Air Force, they chose an ancient symbol known as the Hakaristi. That meant the hook cross, or Philpott cross. It is an old Anglo-Saxon symbol that was perverted by the Dritte Reich, or a dumb mustached man named Adolf Hitler. The difference was that the Hakaristi was parallel to the sides, drawn in blue and in a white circle. The Nazi had theirs at a 45-degree angle, in black on a white circle and a red banner. They didn't see much action until the 30th of November 1939, when the Soviet military declared war on them. The Finnish army managed to field 300 to 340,000 men, including the foreign volunteer forces, 32 tanks, mainly World War I or Interwar-era tanks, 114 planes, including British types, Flight Regiment 19, the Swedish volunteer pilots, French, Italian, South African and American planes. The Soviet army was joined by the Finnish puppet government known as the Finnish Democratic Republic, which didn't last more than 4 months. The Soviets fielded 425 to 760,000 soldiers, 2.5 to 6.5 thousand tanks, and 3,880 planes. Despite having almost twice the soldiers of the Finns held up a stiff resistance due to a better understanding of the land, better logistic lines and decent leaders. The Finnish people suffered 70,000 casualties with 25,904 perishing to defend their home. In turn, the Soviets suffered 321 to 381,000 casualties, with anywhere from 126,875 to 167,976 soldiers missing or killed. This meant that for every one casualty the Finns suffered, they dealt 5 to the Soviets. Simo Hauja, the Finnish sniper, used a Mosin Nagin Model 2830, notably with an iron sight, to kill at least 500 soldiers. He was known as the Taikla Ampaja, or the Magic Sniper. He served until a high explosive incendiary armor-piercing bullet, or hap, tore through his jaw. He survived, but was unconscious until the 13th of March, 1940. When the Finnish government surrendered and ceded the Rybaki Peninsula, Finnish Karelia, and Sula. They would declare war on the Soviets again in 1941, known as the Continuation War, but was known as Operation Barbarossa by the Third Reich. As they say about the enemy of my enemy, so with the help of the Nazis, the Finnish army attempted to reclaim the lost territory. The Axis powers supplied men, money and equipment to the Finnish army, yet that did little to stop the Soviet army. When they are willing to throw more men at you than you have bullets, all you can do is prolong the inevitable. The fighting ended on the 19th of September, 1944 and saw 225,000 Finnish casualties and 84,000 German casualties. The Soviets had 890 to 944,000 casualties, roughly a 4-to-1 exchange. With the loss of the Continuation War, Finland had to cede the Petsamo district and lease the Porkala Peninsula for 10 years to the Soviets. This is because it allowed control over half of the Gulf of Finland. If you had a base there and in Estonia, Leningrad would be blocked from traveling. With the end of the Second World War, the difficult process of rebuilding needed to begin. Finland was not a part of the Marshall Plan as it sided against the Soviets in its proximity to the Union. It was not a part of the Warsaw Pact but was forced to not be a part of the West European community. After reparations were paid to the Soviets, trade between the two accounted for 1/4 of all trade Finland did abroad. While retaining its independence, the country suffered from Finlandization, which meant that the smaller nation had to abide by the larger nation's policies, i.e., Finland having to follow the Soviets' foreign policies in order to retain its independence, otherwise they could be invaded. While not to the level of the East Bloc, or the Baltics, Finland was handcuffed to the Soviet bear until its dissolution in 1991. As you can probably tell, I refrained from mentioning the Finnish religions or anything involving too much about the Sami, Karelian or Tavastins. These are topics that would require more time to explain. So I made the choice to focus on the land of the Finns instead of the nuance of the people, religious practices or beliefs. But that's a story for later. If you want me to cover that, then let me know. Yet words cannot do Finland justice, and I would recommend visiting if possible. There are those who are better informed on the topic, but if you'd like me to try to cover it, let me know. Anyway, I've been the Irish Explainer, and this has been a brief rundown on Finland and its history from the end of the Ice Age to the fall of the USSR. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to place them in the comments below. How did I do and what can I improve on? Let me know what I should cover next. Have a great day and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.